Hi everyone, my name is Mia. Today I'm going to share a story about a time when things weren't so perfect in my family. It's a story about arguments, feeling lost, and how we found our way back to each other. It's not always easy to talk about, but I think it's important because even when things seem broken, there's always a way to fix them. I love my family. My mom is the best at baking cookies, and my dad tells the funniest bedtime stories. But last week, something happened that made me feel like our happy home was breaking apart. Mom and Dad had a big argument, or disagreements over small things like what to eat for dinner or whose turn it was to take out the trash. This was louder, scarier, and made me feel very alone. It started like any other evening. Mom was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The smell of her spaghetti sauce filled the house, making my tummy growl. "Dinner's ready," she called, setting the plates on the table. I ran to my seat, excited because spaghetti is my favorite. Dad came home a little late. His tie loosened and a tired smile on his face. He kissed Mom on the cheek, but she turned away slightly. I noticed, but I didn't think much of it at the time. "Guess what, Dad?" I said, practically bouncing in my chair. "I got an A on my science test."
That's amazing, Mia.
Dad said, his face lighting up as he gave me a high five. Mom smiled too, but seemed distracted. She picked at her food and kept glancing at Dad. "Long day at work?" she asked him after a moment.
Yeah,
Dad replied, sighing.
the usual deadlines and meetings.
Their conversation drifted into quiet as I focused on slurping my spaghetti. Everything seemed fine until Mom spoke again, her tone sharper this time. "Did you remember to pay the electricity bill?" she asked. Dad frowned.
I thought I told you I'd handle it tomorrow.
"You said that last week too," Mom said, crossing her arms. I quickly glanced at them, unsure if I should say something or stay quiet. I decided to stay quiet. As their conversation grew colder, I felt the warm, cozy atmosphere of the dinner table fading. Usually we'd laugh or share stories about our day. Tonight, though, everything felt different. After dinner, I went to the living room to draw, hoping things would go back to normal. I grabbed my crayons and began sketching a picture of our family. It was something I did often because it made me happy, but even from the living room, I could hear their voices growing louder in the kitchen. At first it was just muffled words, but then, "I can't believe you forgot again," Mom's voice echoed.
Why do you always have to bring this up?
Dad replied angrily. Their words felt like cracks in the walls of our home, each one making the space around me feel smaller and smaller. I sat in the living room with my crayons. I wanted to draw something cheerful, a picture of our family, Mom, Dad, and me holding hands under the sun, with a big rainbow in the sky. It always made me happy to draw pictures like that. But tonight, something felt different. The air felt heavy, like the time before a thunderstorm. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen, washing dishes and talking. At first, it sounded normal, just soft murmurs I couldn't make out. Then Mom's voice got louder. "I can't keep doing everything by myself, Tom. You promised to help more." I froze, my crayon hovering over the paper. The yellow sun I was coloring suddenly didn't seem so bright anymore. Dad's voice followed, sounding annoyed.
I work all day, Emily. Do you think I'm just sitting around?
I looked toward the kitchen, even though I couldn't see them from where I sat. Their voices weren't like the usual teasing or laughing I heard when they talked. This felt different. Mom's voice sharpened. "You think your job is harder than mine? At least at work. You get breaks. I'm here all day, every day, juggling everything." Dad didn't back down. "That's not what I said."
But you act like nothing I do matters.
I tried to focus on my drawing, but my hands were shaking. The crayon I was holding snapped in half, the sound making me jump. I stared at the broken pieces in my hand and whispered to myself, "It's just a fight. Grown-ups fight sometimes, right?" But deep down, I knew this wasn't like their usual arguments over what to eat for dinner, or whose turn it was to take out the trash. This was louder, scarier. Their voices got louder and louder. Echoing through the house, I could hear the clinking of dishes stop suddenly, like someone had slammed something down.
"You're always making excuses," Mom shouted. "Why can't you just admit when you've messed up?"
And you're always nagging.
Dad shot back.
Do you even appreciate anything I do?
I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my hands over my ears, but their words still seeped through. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was in my throat. I tried humming a song to myself. One mom used to sing to me at bedtime, but the melody felt too small to drown out their angry voices. I thought about going into the kitchen. Maybe if I told a joke or showed them my drawing, they'd stop. But my feet felt glued to the floor. What if they got mad at me for interrupting? Instead, I decided to go upstairs, but as I stood up, I heard Mom's voice, louder than ever.
"Maybe it would be easier if you weren't here all the time."
I froze. My breath caught in my chest.
What's that supposed to mean?
Dad's voice came back, angrier than I'd ever heard it. I didn't want to hear more. My feet started moving on their own, carrying me away from the noise. Before I left the living room, I glanced at my drawing. It showed us smiling together, holding hands under a rainbow. I picked it up and stared at it, tears blurring my vision. Maybe if they see this, they'll stop fighting, I thought. I tiptoed to the kitchen doorway and placed the drawing on the counter where they could see it. "Please don't be mad anymore," I whispered. Then I ran upstairs and shut the door behind me, pressing my back against it as if that could block out the yelling. When I got to my room, I shut the door quietly, but it felt like the noise from downstairs was chasing me. I pressed my back against the door and slid down to the floor, hugging my knees. My heart was racing, and I couldn't stop shaking. I could still hear their voices, muffled but sharp. The words were hard to make out now, but the tone was enough. Angry, hurt, distant. It wasn't the warm, loving voices I was used to. I grabbed my pillow and held it close, like it could protect me from the storm outside my door. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. I wiped them away quickly, feeling silly. Why am I crying? I thought, Mom and Dad always figure things out, right? But tonight, it didn't feel like they would. I needed to do something, anything, to feel better. I looked around my room and saw my favorite stuffed animal, Mr. Snuggles, sitting on my bed. I grabbed him and held him tight. "Everything will be okay, right, Mr. Snuggles?" I whispered. But even saying it out loud didn't make me believe it. I decided to draw again. Drawing always made me feel better. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started sketching another rainbow. But this time, it felt harder. My hands didn't want to move the way they usually did. The colors didn't look as bright. The rainbow looked small, lonely, like it was missing something. As I stared at my unfinished drawing, a memory came rushing back. It was just last week. We had been decorating the Christmas tree together. Dad had lifted me up so I could put the star on top, and Mom was laughing because I kept wiggling around.
Careful, Mia.
Dad had said, pretending to wobble.
If you keep moving, we'll both fall over.
I giggled so hard that tears came to my eyes. Mom had taken a picture of us, and we all looked so happy. The memory felt like a warm hug, but it also made my chest ache. I wondered, where did that happiness go? For a while, the house got quiet again. I thought maybe, just maybe, things were back to normal. I tiptoed to my door and opened it a crack. The hallway was empty, and I couldn't hear anything from downstairs. But the quiet felt too heavy. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet I liked when we read bedtime stories or watched movies together. This was the kind of quiet that felt like something was wrong. Sometime later, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. My door creaked open, and I saw Mom standing there. Her face looked tired, and her eyes were red, like she'd been crying too. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "Are you okay?" I didn't know what to say. I nodded, but I wasn't sure if it was true. Mom walked in and sat on the edge of my bed. She stroked my hair gently, the way she always did when I was upset.
I'm sorry you had to hear all that.
She whispered. I looked at her and asked the question that had been stuck in my head all night. Do you and Dad still love each other? Her face crumpled for a second, but she quickly smiled.
Of course we do, Mia. Families argue sometimes, but that doesn't mean we stop loving each other. And we love you more than anything. Her words made me feel a little better.
But the ache in my chest didn't fully go away. Can you stay with me? I asked. She nodded and lay down beside me, wrapping me in her arms. For the first time that night, I felt a little safer. When I woke up the next morning, my room was quiet, but my head felt heavy, like I hadn't really slept. I looked around and saw Mom wasn't there anymore. The spot next to me on the bed was cold, and for a second, I wondered if last night had just been a bad dream. But then I remembered the shouting, the broken crayon, and the way Mom had looked at me before she said goodnight. It wasn't a dream. It was real. I hugged Mr. Snuggles close to my chest. Maybe today will be better, I whispered. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw Dad sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He was staring out the window, not reading the newspaper like he usually did. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. "Good morning, Dad," I said softly, trying to sound normal. He turned and gave me a small smile.
Good morning, kiddo. Did you sleep okay?
I nodded, but I didn't feel like talking. I looked around for Mom. She was at the stove, flipping pancakes. Pancakes are my favorite breakfast, but somehow they didn't smell as good as they usually did. The kitchen felt strange. Usually breakfast time was noisy and fun. Mom would hum a song, and Dad would tell me silly jokes to make me laugh. But today it was quiet. Too quiet.
Pancakes are ready,
Mom said, her voice soft but flat. She placed a plate in front of me, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks, Mom," I said, trying to sound cheerful. I looked at both of them, wondering if they were going to talk to each other. But they didn't. Dad kept sipping his coffee, and Mom stayed busy cleaning the counter. Even though it was already spotless, I couldn't take the quiet anymore. It felt too heavy, like last night was still hanging over us. "So, what are we doing today?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the silent room. Mom and Dad both looked at me, and for a second, I thought they might smile or say something to make me feel better. But Mom just said,
I have some errands to run later.
Dad nodded and added,
I'll probably be in the garage working on that project.
Their answers felt so separate, like they weren't even in the same room. I poked at my pancake with my fork, not really hungry anymore. I wanted to ask them if they were okay, if we were okay, but I was scared of what they might say. Instead, I said, "I drew something last night." Mom turned to look at me. And Dad raised an eyebrow. It's on the counter, I added, pointing to the kitchen counter, where I'd left my picture of us under the rainbow. Mom walked over and picked it up. She stared at it for a long time, and I couldn't tell what she was thinking. Dad got up and stood next to her. He looked at the picture too, for a moment. They didn't say anything.
It's beautiful, Mia.
Mom finally said, her voice shaky.
Yeah?
Dad added,
You're really talented, kiddo.
but their smiles still didn't feel real. And they didn't say anything to each other. After breakfast, I went back to my room. It felt easier to be alone than to sit in that strange, quiet kitchen. I pulled out my sketchbook and started drawing again. This time, I didn't draw a rainbow. I didn't know what to draw. I just scribbled, letting my hands move however they wanted. My chest felt tight, and my eyes stung with tears I didn't want to cry. I whispered to Mr. Snuggles, I don't like it when things are like this. I just want everything to be normal again. That afternoon, the rain kept falling, soft and steady, tapping against the windows like a sad little song. I stayed in my room for a long time, lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling. Mr. Snuggles sat beside me, his button eyes looking as lost as I felt. I tried to read a book, but the words wouldn't stick in my head. I tried to colour, but the crayons didn't feel right in my hand. Everything just felt wrong. I wanted to feel better, but I didn't know how. That's when I heard a quiet knock on my door. Come in, I said softly. The door opened, and Mom peeked in. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she was holding a cup of hot chocolate with marshmallows, my favourite.
Hey, sweetie.
She said, stepping into my room.
I thought you might like this.
Thanks, Mom, I said as she handed me the cup. She sat down on the edge of my bed, smoothing out the blanket with her hands. For a moment, we didn't say anything. The only sound was the rain outside.
I'm sorry about last night,
she said finally, her voice quiet but full of meaning. I looked at her, surprised. You shouldn't have had to hear all that, she continued. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too. I held the cup of hot chocolate tightly, feeling its warmth in my hands. Were you and Dad fighting because of me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly.
Oh, Mia, no, not at all. This has nothing to do with you.
Then why? I asked. Why were you yelling at each other? She sighed and looked down at her hands.
Sometimes when people love each other, they get upset about things. Your dad and I had a disagreement. But that doesn't mean we don't love each other. Are you?
But you looked so mad, I said, my voice trembling. It didn't feel like you loved each other. Mom reached over and took my hand. We do love each other, Mia. And we love you more than anything. Sometimes love means working through the hard times together. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. Mom sat with me for a while, just holding my hand. It felt nice to have her there, even if everything still felt a little broken.
Do you want to do something together?
She asked after a while. Like what? I asked, looking up at her.
Well, when I was your age, I used to bake cookies with my mom whenever I felt sad. It always made me feel better,
she said with a small smile. Cookies? I repeated, perking up just a little. She nodded.
Chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, peanut butter, you name it. What do you think?
I hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but only if we make chocolate chip.
Deal,
Mom said, standing up and holding out her hand. The kitchen felt warmer than it had that morning, even though the rain was still falling outside. Mom pulled out all the ingredients, and I helped measure the sugar and flour. Oops, too much sugar, I giggled as I spilled some on the counter.
That's okay.
Mom said, laughing as she grabbed a cloth to clean it up.
Extra sugar just means extra sweet cookies.
As we worked, the smell of baking cookies filled the air. And for the first time all day, I felt like things might be okay. When the cookies were in the oven, Mom leaned against the counter and looked at me.
Mia, I want you to know something.
What? I asked, licking a bit of cookie dough off my finger.
No matter what happens, your dad and I will always be here for you. We're a team, the three of us, and teams stick together, even when things get tough.
I nodded, feeling a little braver. Okay.
And if you ever feel scared or confused, you can always talk to us. Promise?
She asked, holding out her pinky. I hooked my pinky around hers. Promise, just as we were pulling the cookies out of the oven. Dad walked into the kitchen.
What's going on in here? Smells amazing.
Cookies, I said, holding up a tray. Want one?
Do I ever?
He said, grabbing a cookie and pretending it was too hot to hold.
Ow, ow, ow.
I giggled, and Mom rolled her eyes, but I could see her smiling. Dad took a bite and sighed dramatically.
Mia, these are the best cookies I've ever tasted. You must be a professional baker.
Mom helped, I said, smiling shyly.
Well, then you two make a great team.
He said, ruffling my hair. For the first time since last night, I felt like our family was a team again that night. As I lay in bed, the rain had finally stopped. The house felt quieter, but not in the heavy, sad way it had before. This quiet felt peaceful. I hugged Mr. Snuggles close and whispered, maybe things will be okay after all. And as I drifted off to sleep, I dreamed of warm cookies, laughter, and rainbows.